if you don't actually believe you can do this and get a training contract, then how can you convince a firm who are going to spend thousands of pounds training you, thousands of pounds in salary for you? How can you convince them that you're good enough if you don't believe yourself?
What was some of the big changes that you made from, when you were initially applying to starting to seeing some success?
I think in my most successful cycle, what I did know is who I was, the skills I could bring to the table, what I wanted from my career. And as a result of doing that process of discovery, that meant that I had a more strategized plan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Becoming a Lawyer. Today I'm joined by Ayaz Saboor, a former solicitor, coach and founder of the Commercial Law Pathway. Ayaz has had an unconventional path from part-time jobs to qualifying at DWF, then leaving practice to help others navigate law careers. I'm really excited to be jumping into a discussion with him about his career path and how he is today helping law students and trainee solicitors. Ayaz, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, the heat's just crazy around here. I can't handle it.
I've not known a summer like it, to be fair. It's been consistent for 2.5 months, maybe, like with the odd patch of bad weather. But overall, it's been a pretty good summer, I'd say.
Yeah, it's been nice. So we'll jump straight into it. So Ayaz, if you had to describe your journey in one sentence, what would it be?
One sentence. I would say challenging but rewarding and fun. So my journey has been challenging, rewarding, and fun.
Okay, cool. We're going to jump into why. So take us right back to your early work experience. It doesn't have to be legal. And tell us what it was like.
I mean, I'd say I first started working like really young because my old man had a shop. And like every good son that's in a family that has a business, you kind of have to help in whatever way you can. So yeah, I started working there. When I turned 16, I then got myself a part-time job at McDonald's. I was firstly cooking burgers, and I'd say I did a good job. And then I later got client-facing skills and was on the drive-through windows, which was great. But I was at McDonald's for, I would think, a year, and it was pretty good. Did burn myself a lot on the grill, which wasn't as fun. But aside from that, it was good. My second job was at a cash and carry called Booker's. That was okay. I was on the shop floor, on the tills, and then later I had experience in the cash office. And then I did a few retail jobs. I worked as a Waitrose, as a delivery driver whilst I was at university. And then once I graduated, I then embarked on my legal journey and became a paralegal, then trainee, etc.
Nice. So you've had a lot of diverse experiences and been fortunate enough to experience a range of part-time jobs, which obviously develop transferable skills, which I'm sure you'll touch upon. So these early part-time work experiences that you had, how do you think they shaped your mindset and even developed practical skills going into law? And were they things you were thinking about when you were doing those part-time jobs?
No, I don't think at that point I was ever thinking about how these will help me in the future, nor was I probably thinking what skills am I gaining. I think I'd be surprised if at 16 anybody's doing that, really. I suppose maybe more so now.
The apprenticeships coming.
Yeah. But for me, no, I was just working, essentially, just doing the job that I was assigned. How do I think they then later helped me in a career in law? I think this is one of the things that you often hear at events is that when you're applying to firms, don't lessen your non-legal work experience, because it does just that. It does build transferable skills that will stand you in good stead across practice. And for me, it was little things like communication skills, teamwork, and the ability to just talk to anybody. When you work a customer service role, the different types of people that you encounter on a day-to-day basis will be from all manner of and all walks of life, and being able to communicate and build a dialogue with each individual person is a skill in itself, and a skill that then later helps translate into the legal world, because law is very much people orientated world, whether it's speaking to clients, whether it's speaking to your team internally, whether it's communicating across teams or to the other side on a deal or whatever it might be. You are regularly in contact with people. So yeah, I think that lands on the fact that communication was probably the greatest skill that I think I learned. But then other things like hard work, teamwork, etc. Yeah, they all do play a part, and they all shape who you are as an individual, and they did shape me.
For sure, yeah. And I think it's at the end of the day, when you do get secure that training contract, you're going to be in an environment where you're working, and your part-time jobs you were working, right? And so for sure, there's going to be a lot of traits that you would have had in those part-time jobs that would have shone out, whether it's dealing with people. You're also going to deal with people when you have got that training contract or when you are in a legal firm. So you're going to have to draw from those experiences, and in those application processes, you need to highlight that you've got these skills and in these environments. And it comes down to being able to articulate yourself and getting your points across very clearly. It's the experiences that you've gained in those part-time jobs that you're going to draw upon. So fast forwarding a little bit, so now you're applying for training contracts, right? And how did you deal with rejections, or were you fortunate enough to get a training contract the first time around?
Yeah, that would make this whole podcast much shorter, I think. And it would probably not have led to the career I've currently got. No, I also paused because I was thinking about how beautiful it would have been to just get a training contract first time round. That would be awesome.
I've dreamt about it many times.
Yeah. No, I did not get a training contract first or second, and it was third time around in terms of application cycles. How did I deal with rejection? I think it's, for me, well, I think it went from the extreme to then learning. The extreme initially, when I first, because I'll step back a little bit and say a bit of a point that I always think about is I think applying for training contracts is the first time in any law student's, or at least maybe my naive brain, it's the first time a law student ever gets told they're not good at something. If you're making it to second, third year of a university degree, you're probably, for the most part of your academic life, you've been told you're pretty good at something. You've probably done well at school. You probably then went on to college and you probably did really well. You're at university, you're probably still doing really well. And at all junctures of your academic life, you've had people tell you that you're okay, you're doing well, and this. And then when you start applying for training contracts, it's like a brick wall. And suddenly you're looking and you're like, I'm not as good as people were saying. And I think for me, that was quite a shock. Again, naively. I think initially I took the rejections really, really to heart. I used to think maybe they were personal, maybe they're me. I also had a lack of confidence. I'm from a small town in the north of England. Didn't have the best A levels, didn't have the best university on my kind of believe the rejections and believe that they're true. So it's kind of like a vicious circle of, well, I think something, the firms are telling me this, therefore it must be true. And I think I, for a period, got into that cycle and kind of would allow the inner thoughts to kind of take control of me and think, actually, it's not, I can't do this. So I'd say that's initially how I dealt with rejection. And then I'd say later, as I matured into the training contract process, because I think everyone does mature in the process and kind of understands more about what's needed, what they want, etc., etc. I started using rejections as a learning tool, I would say, and being a point at which I could learn from and develop. And I think the best example is I had in my successful cycle, I had 2 vacation schemes, one in the spring and then one in the summer. And the one in the spring, I didn't get the training contract, and I was the only person on that particular cohort to get a direct no. Everybody else was on the maybe or yes pile. And I learned a lot about myself in that period and how to develop ahead of the second vacation scheme, which was, I think it was a whole journey. It was from kind of taking them to heart, taking them personally, thinking that this is the worst thing and I'm not good enough, right the way through to using rejections as a tool to learn from.
I just want to focus on that part about where you spoke about the vicious cycle you were in with constant rejections and stuff, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers are finding themselves, feeling really down, and it's a horrible place to be in. So was it a gradual sort of process that allowed you to break out of that cycle, or was it a sudden change in your mindset?
Bit of both, weirdly. I think the gradual element of it came with me thinking and realizing that I am capable. So at the same time as applying, I was a paralegal, and a paralegal at a decent firm. And I think it was the realization that I can hold a job in law. I'm not getting fired yet. So it was kind of an element of, well, I can do this. And there was, excuse me, there was an overnight element to it in a way that I still can't put my finger on, where I kind of just thought, well, and I'm sure you've heard of the old phrase, if you don't love yourself, how can you expect someone else to love you? And I think the same applies in this process, in that if you don't actually believe you can do this and get a training contract, then how can you convince a firm who are going to spend thousands of pounds training you, thousands of pounds in salary for you? How can you convince them that you're good enough if you don't believe yourself? So I realized that, and I had to work on kind of being confident. So rather than opening an application and thinking, why would this firm hire me, which is what I used to do, actually open the application and think, well, I do have a chance. I have as good a chance as anybody. And I think that's that change in self-talk, because it all starts with self-talk. That change in the way I spoke to myself, I think, led to greater success in the process.
Amazing. And I wanted to ask next, what are some of the biggest changes you've made? And I know you've just mentioned one here now, is that self-belief and self-talk, and almost seeing yourself in that position before you're even there. So what were some of the big changes that you made from when you were initially applying to starting to seeing some success?
Self-talk, really important. Like, actually tell yourself that you're good. And I'll just add that I always use a sporting analogy, but some of the greatest sports people that we know, they are highly trained athletes. You have to realize, and I use Cristiano Ronaldo just because he's a global name and the greatest footballer ever. I'll have no debate on that. He will not sit in the changing rooms ahead of a match and say, lads, I'm going to have a terrible game today, right? He sits there and he goes, I'm going to have the best game and I'll score a hat trick and I'll carry the team, right? And that's kind of what we need to think in this process about ourselves and our own success. In terms of what steps I did, I think in my most successful cycle, what I did know is who I was, the skills I could bring to the table, what I wanted from my career. And as a result of doing that process of discovery, that meant that I had a more strategized plan with how I approached the recruitment cycle. So having firms that I thought would fit the career that I wanted to build for myself, which then meant that I could then talk about working at that firm and working in the particular areas that they specialize in, and on what they do in a more authentic and compelling way. I think what I fell into the trap of in the first couple of rounds, which I think most people do, is following the glitz and the glamour and trying to apply for firms that you actually don't know much about them, and you just follow the crowd in terms of applying for them. Magic circle, we have to be there. So I think that was how I differentiated the process in my successful round.
Yeah, for sure. And I really agree with that point you make at the end, avoiding that glamorous approach, going out there and finding out if a firm's a fit for you, because it's not just about I want a training contract, and I want to get into a firm. It's you want to get into the firm that's right for you. And before you even sit down and start drafting applications, go out there and see what house you like, see what firm you like. You need to envision and be in a place that's suited to your sort of cultural beliefs, or people and environments that you like. And the only way you're going to sort of see that is by going out there and meeting the people within the firm and having those discussions.
And it's funny because I always used to hate the saying when I was applying to firms, and I'd go to open days and I'd hear people, it tended to be the firm or from different groups or whatever, and they used to say, it's a two-way street. You need to like us and we need to like you. And I used to sit there and go, I don't need to like you. I'll take anything. And that's really the wrong approach. That really is the wrong approach, because if you can't sell why you like them, they won't hire you. So it's a double-edged sword in a way. You'd rather be certain on where you want to be, not just because it will be easier to get the training contract, but also it will lead to a happier you when you have that training contract, which is actually and arguably the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I know we've spoken about this before, and it'd be great for our listeners to also listen to your thoughts on this. a naive person might say, I just want the training contract, I just want to get paid a lot or whatever. But you need to balance that with sustainability and happiness, because that does matter. And eventually you might not see it now, but you might hit a brick wall where stuff just starts spiraling. Your performance might go down. You just might not be happy. And then it can sometimes be a bit too late, where you're stuck in a contract where now there's sacrifices you're going to have to make if you want to hop out, and it can cause all sorts of problems. So it's always useful to prepare in advance for that and be really honest with yourself.
I always like to kind of sit people I work with down and say, and make them realize that the decisions we make now and the work that we do now is for the person that they will be in 5 years' time, and not even 10 years' time, and not just in the short term in the preceding 2 years when they have a training contract. You are looking to apply to firms where you can see yourself building a career. That's the belief that I take into this process, is that we want to apply to firms where we can see ourselves completing the training contract, qualifying into the firm, and progressing through that, linear process, because that's ultimately what you want. You want to apply to somewhere that, yeah, okay, you might move, of course you might, but that will be through an opportunity rather than you being miserable and not enjoying it there, right? And I think, I do think people don't spend enough time thinking about the long-term effects of the decisions they make at this juncture. And I think it's really important to do that kind of discovery.
Yeah. Do you think it's all naivety at play and inexperience, or do you think it's purely mindset and something that can sort of be mentored and shifted in a person?
I definitely think it can be mental. Do I think it's naivety? I think part of it will be naivety. I think part of it is probably status driven as well. I think law students and people that want to be lawyers naturally are some of the most incredibly competitive and status driven people we are ever likely to meet. We'll never admit it, of course we won't, but it is true. So I think that feeds into it as well. And then I think it's other things like, when you look at the available events online aimed at aspiring lawyers, the main bulk of it is those firms, right? The firms that, let's say, I might be happiest at might not attend these events. So therefore, how do I know they exist, right? So it's kind of, for me, it's a case of saying, kind of, forget that, like, go to the events, go meet these firms as well. You might like these firms. I'm not saying you won't, but also realize that there's a whole spectrum of law firms out there that don't just go to these events, or they might go to fewer events, or they might go to this event, and it's about, kind of, for me, it's a case of just opening people's eyes and saying, have you looked into this, read this, watch their videos, or whatever it might be, and see what the lived experience is, and don't just go to the most visible place, kind of thing. So I think maybe it's a bit of naivety, maybe it's less exposure on their part, or more exposure for those firms, and reputation. So it's a good mix of things as to why that happens, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And no, I do agree with that point. I know someone who was applying for training contracts, but they were someone who was really keen on, working in litigation and commercial litigation, but they were applying for full service law firms. And I was talking to them, and I was like, there's firms out there, boutique firms you can call them, that will specialize in solely litigation work. Do you think it might be less competitive and better for you and would make you happier if you went for those firms? Or do they? And then their response was, "Oh, but do they even offer training contracts? We won't know until you've gone
Yeah,
out.
yeah,
Look,
yeah. Go look.
prior to this discussion, you didn't even know those firms. There were firms out there that were highly skilled and really good at practicing an area of law that you were really happy with."
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a lot of it has to be self-driven, right? What's the normal process of applying for a training contract? If you're super prepared, this isn't your process. But normally, the process will be, I'm going to find the first firm that I like the sound of, and I'm going to go apply for them, right? So top firm that you like, okay, open their application. I'm going to draft the application, drafted the application, right, I've sent it. Maybe that's taken you 2-3 weeks, okay? The next step tends to always be, go on to some sort of deadline checker and see what the next deadline is of a firm that you vaguely have heard of and like the sound of. That is most people's process, right?
Are you talking about the process I've taken, Ayaz?
Probably. No,
Yeah,
that's exactly it. And I think for me, it's this period now. So we're recording mid-August. I don't know if you wanted to tell people, but we are. And it's ahead of the application cycle opening in full swing. And for those that I'm working with, this is the time to go and have fun. This is the time to go and look at those obscure firms that you've never heard of, or firms that are lower down in the rankings list, and see what you think of them, see what they specialize in, and see if you have the appetite for them, because you don't know. You actually don't know. In the in the era where we have more information at our disposal, right, we can build a picture of what life is like in such firms. So go on that period of exploration, figure out what kind of firms you like, build that list, and then that's where you go from, rather than finding application number one, doing the application, and then going on and seeing, well, okay, this deadline's next. Because actually, by the time you get to the boutique firms, for example, right? Boutique firms tend to have deadlines that kind of not they don't run in the similar time frame to, say, national and international firms. By the time you get to the deadlines of the boutique firms, you've probably done 15, 20 applications. You're burnt out. You're like, I don't know if I fancy doing that one anymore, right? Whereas that could have been the perfect fit for you. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like needs to be a lot of thought at this stage early so that you can strategize and plan effectively for what you want.
yeah, for sure. And yeah, like you say, it's about allocating your time and resources effectively to make sure you're giving the best version of yourself to these
Yeah,
firms.
exactly.
And focusing a bit on the training contract that you managed to secure itself and that sense of feeling. So you've gotten an offer. I'm sure it felt amazing when I got my apprenticeship offer. It felt amazing. It was I couldn't believe I was pinching myself. So what was it like working at DWF as a trainee, going through the different seats? What were you discovering about yourself, and how were you feeling when you literally got that offer?
I mean, let's talk about the offer for a moment because it was one of the most incredible days ever.
I can imagine.
The way DWF did it at the time as well was there was basically a final stage after the vacation scheme where they'd invite people there to interview partners. Rather than them interviewing you, you were split into groups of 3 or 4 and you would interview the partners. And then the partners would rotate one by one. And then once they did that and they closed for the day, the managing partner would say, okay, we're going into this meeting room to talk about all of you. And then I'm going to phone you personally this afternoon and tell you whether you've got the offer or not. And yeah, so I went out for a drink with about 10 of us. And I was the only one who was applying to the Manchester office. And he said that the approach he takes is he does the furthest location first. So Scotland, London, Birmingham, Liverpool, and then Manchester. So I was last out of everybody, which was nerve-wracking. But yeah, everyone I went out with fortunately got the offer, which was good. And so did I. And yeah, the feeling was incredible. All that hard work, all that, the pain, the tears, the self-doubt, the worry, that period where you're applying for training contracts, let's not forget, it's also a period of your life where you can't really plan anything. You can't buy a house, really, maybe. You don't even know where exactly you'll be living, how much you'll be earning, anything. To have that security of knowing, this is going to be what my life looks like. It's really good. The training contract itself was great. My first seat was in construction, which was a mix of contentious and non-contentious work. So it was a good spread. It was a good mix. The team were great. We used to have so much fun. But it was also really, really, really busy. I'm pretty certain, I was thinking about this the other day, but I'm sure the handover note I received from the previous trainee was something like 70, 90 pages. I can't remember, but it was a big handover with a lot of live cases. So yeah, you can imagine that was a very hands-on seat, which I
Did you
thoroughly
read it
enjoyed.
all?
Yeah. We had to sit there one by one and go through everything, and she was explaining. And I was like, I'm going to forget this in a moment. Second seat was in occupational health, but that was the seat where Boris Johnson had said everyone's got to work from home. So that happened. So that brought about its own challenges being a trainee in a very new environment, because at that point the legal industry wasn't that well adapted to working from home, and especially not for juniors. So yeah, that brought about character building, best word for it. Then my third seat was a comment out at Amazon, but again, it was COVID, so it was in my house. And then my fourth seat was regulatory compliance and investigations, which is where I qualified. And yeah, it was great. Enjoyed it.
So then that leads me on to asking you, why did you leave the legal field?
Yeah, so COVID for me was the catalyst. A couple of reasons. So, firstly, I've always spoken a lot about the pain and trauma that it took to get a training contract, and that personally never left me. And I always said I wanted to do something in this space, and my initial idea was a podcast. Um, uh, and then COVID happened, and my LinkedIn was full of worried, anxious, scared, aspiring lawyers as to what the future looked like. Because if you remember and think back to the immediate knee-jerk reaction to coronavirus was an immediate halt on everything. Kind of the world stopped momentarily. And that meant hiring practices, right? People had been preparing for, applying for training contracts, and suddenly there were no training contracts to apply to. So I thought I need to do something, or I want to do something. So I started a free WhatsApp group, like a community. And within the space of like 3-4 hours, I think 200 people joined. I closed access. And then I just did Saturday morning sessions every week for an hour. I'd get someone, either myself or someone I knew in the legal industry, to come on and talk about their journey, leave time for a Q&A, and it was really good. And then in my spare time, I would do one-on-one mentoring sessions, and I just realised that I'm actually okay at it. And I've always wanted to be my own boss, and I thought, don't have kids, don't have a mortgage. If ever there was a time to kind of take a gamble on myself, that was it. And yeah, did that 3.5 years ago. Yeah.
My experience of COVID was slightly different because I was in uni at the time. So it was more so pack your bags and sit at home. I never thought what it would have been like for people, that had training contracts or were working, because it would have been a sudden change for you guys. You're going through training, this is going to make you a qualified and competent and skilled solicitor, but then all
I
of a
was
sudden
I was
you're at home.
1 week into a new seat.
One
And if you
week.
think 1 week, it happened, I think I was first or second week. So our changeover day, I remember this because it's my partner's birthday, but I'm pretty certain Monday the 2nd I had off. Tuesday the 3rd was my first day in the office. And I'm pretty certain we were all told to work from home on the 7th. I'm almost certain. So it was like, yeah, it was
First,
pretty of
yeah.
March. Yeah. So yeah, it was wild. So I'd only just met the team. Some people weren't in. A training contract's effectively like 4 new jobs, right? 4 different seats, 4 new jobs, and that comes about with learning new people, learning not just a new area of law. That's what people tend to always just think it's a new area of law. No, it's completely new people, new working practices, new case management system, possibly. And to try and learn that from your bedroom, when it wasn't the known thing, when people hadn't built systems and methods in which to do it, it was very challenging. And I think you had to be quite proactive as a trainee to put yourself out there and kind of throw yourself in front of people and say, I exist.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it would have been in a time where people themselves are trying to figure out, how it's going to work for them. So it must have been lonely in a way too. But I guess you would have still had trainees to talk to, but then you were all in the same sort of boat as to you
Yeah,
don't really know what's going on or how things are going to work.
I think, well, yes and no. Yes, lonely, but also you have to remember COVID brought about one of the greatest sense of communities ever, right? Like where everyone was in it together and everyone was
Yeah.
more heightened in terms of checking in on people. It kind of, yeah, like the amount of pub quizzes I did during COVID was insane, right? You're on calls with people that you've not seen in ages having a pub quiz. So yeah, I mean, yeah, but it was definitely challenging, but it's hopefully never to be repeated again for anybody.
Yeah, for sure. And what advice would you give to someone afraid of stepping off the conventional legal path and, making that leap? So, how for you, I know it was partly because there was COVID and, you've gone home and it's been a drastic change. But for someone who doesn't want to be in that traditional legal role and wants to step out and maybe do something else?
I think find what the passion project of yours is, or find out what actually fuels the fire inside of you and chase it. Right? You'll. I think one thing I didn't want for myself was to spend a life of what if and think, right now I could be approaching 4 years PQE, right? Be fairly senior. But if I'd had this thought, not gone through with it, I could have spent the last 4 years wondering and looking and going, I wonder what life would have been like had I taken that leap of faith and just done it. And I think for me personally, I couldn't have lived with that. I'd have been, if I think something, I've got to go do it. I'd rather regret doing something than regret not doing something. And I think that's a good kind of rationale to live by, so long as the thing is the thing that you're choosing to do isn't something reckless or stupid. So yeah, I mean, if you've got a thought about how you want to not necessarily follow the traditional legal route, and you know what that might be, and there's more and more jobs coming about in legal tech or legal adjacent careers, and if you find something that really you're passionate about, you're interested in, you're good at, go follow it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what advice would you give to someone who has found a passion project and in a time where, there's a lot of remote working, it's difficult for people to network and connect? What advice would you give to those people? How do they get themselves out there?
Yeah, I think you're doing a great job. Um, Podcasts, speak to people. I think LinkedIn's a great tool where you can find people in your industry and in similar fields where you can connect. I think since COVID, people are far more open to being approached on LinkedIn and having virtual coffees, right? Virtual introductory meetings are far more commonplace now than they were pre-COVID, where you kind of had to agree to arrange to meet somebody in person, which takes an hour out of your day just getting there. Then you've got to, whereas virtual coffee meetings really easy for people. So that's one suggestion. Two, that for pretty much any niche nowadays, there's pretty much a community focused group targeted at that. Join that, find other people doing what you're doing, because that the journey, whatever it might be, will no doubt come with its own trials and tribulations and be tough. So you want to be around people that share in those experiences. And yeah, that's kind of what I would say.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm sure that's going to help a lot of people that are on the edge of sort of deciding on whether they stay doing whatever it is they're doing or making that leap. So looking at the commercial law pathway brand that you've built for yourself, I know you mentioned it started off with a WhatsApp community and then on the weekends offering help and guidance. So what gaps did you start to see and what were you trying to start to fill with the brand itself?
I think for me, I just think there's to realize that this journey is very individual and every person's different. And when firms say you need to be specific, they don't just mean you need to be specific about the firm. You need to be specific about you, and everyone's individual journey is unique. So I like helping people understand what their unique journey is and what that then contributes to their unique selling points. So that's one thing that I saw was a gap in the market, in a sense that it's not a kind of one size fits all. Like being a coach, you're very adaptable to each individual person that you work with. I also think that the information that's available to law students from career services doesn't tend to be the best. And I think there's more that can be done, which is what initially led me to kind of do this. Did it change over time? Yeah, I didn't initially kind of think I'd be a coach. I thought I'd kind of create like an online maybe course or community, but I've always found the coaching more rewarding and more successful because I get to know the people I work with somewhat like friends.
Yeah.
Or like friends. And I think that works much better because I can help spot the weaknesses and areas to improve more easily than, not being present and just kind of giving advice to the masses, which
Yeah.
isn't my style.
Yeah, that takes us quite nicely onto my next question, which is have you got any success stories that made you realise, okay, this is why I do what I do, that you'd be happy to share with us?
Yeah, loads. So who do I pick? So we'll go with one that I always speak about. So a career changer. He initially wanted to do law back when he was 18, signed up, didn't do it, then moved on and started in the police, worked his way up to, I believe, detective, then left the police and started working in insurance as a loss adjuster. Oh, he's going to kill me if I've got that wrong, but something like that. I'm going to be gutted if it's not. And then he embarked on his law degree again, and he reached out to me after 1 or 2 cycles of rejections. I think it was 1. And we worked together on his strategy, on his weaknesses. For him, with video interviews, we ran consistent mocks to make him feel more comfortable. We did various different drills, and he subsequently got a training contract, which that was in my kind of first year of coaching, and so that made me feel good. Another one, just trying to think. So another guy, non-law grad, was doing his masters when he reached out to me again. 1 cycle of rejections, came to me. We worked on, and this is an interesting story because we worked on applications from around this time for the whole cycle, and he applied to Norton Rose's direct training contract, because people always think don't apply for direct training contract because there's less chance. And my thought and my take is always, you never know, if they see a good candidate, they're not going to let you just slide by. And he applied, he got through to their telephone interview and then was rejected, but they said, we really like you, we'd like to fast track you through to our winter vac scheme assessment centre, which he then got on. He got on the winter vac scheme, secured the training contract at Norton Rose. So yeah, I think those 2 are the ones that stand out, but I'm sure there's more. I know there's more.
Yeah, they sound like amazing stories, and I'm sure they would have been ecstatic when they received the training contract offers.
I hope so.
Over the moon. And it just goes to show, like, their backgrounds, being in the police and having these, what some would say, unrelated experiences, but they've still got a training contract offer.
I've worked with tons of people that have got training contracts that don't have a day in a law firm.
Yeah, and it goes to show it's possible. It really comes down to the person.
It comes down to how you sell yourself and how you sell, why you want to be at that firm.
Yeah, and so before this podcast, I spoke to a few trainees and I asked them, and I said to them, I'm going to have Ayaz on, and can you give me a couple of questions you'd want to ask him? So I'll ask you the first one, and then after, I'll ask you the second one. So the first question they asked is, if you could talk to your younger self at the start of your legal journey, what would you say? So now that you've had all these experiences.
So before I got my training contract,
yeah,
be confident. I think it's easier said than done, but I think if you've got a lack of confidence in your ability and approach, it will becomes much tougher to reach the goal that you set yourself. So for me, what I would have loved in my first round is to actually open the applications and think, I'm at least in with a fighting chance. Whereas when I initially started opening applications, I was thinking, why am I even bothering, kind of thing. And then, just there's going to be rejections. Don't worry about it.
Okay, cool. And then what's one most single common thing that people often overlook when they are applying for training contracts?
We spoke about it, non-legal work experience.
Okay, easily. And what do you think about choosing the firm? Do you think that's, again, a common sort of pitfall?
Yeah, that's a common pitfall. I think spending time, this is what I've been hammering all for the past 2 weeks with people, is this is the great time where picking that list and curating that list to a point where it's you and it reflects who you are and what your aims are is really, really important, because that's ultimately how we hope that you will lead to a successful career and a happy career.
And a final question that comes off that question, the answer to that question about picking the right firm. So how does someone really decide if a firm is for them? Is it by attending the events? Is looking at the website good enough?
No, I'd never say just looking at the website is enough. And also I would caveat everything I've said to a point that you're never going to be 100%, right? We're never going to know 100% whether a firm is for us or not, because that's just impossible, right? You could spend a year at a firm and only just then realise that actually it's not what I thought it was. However, we are aspiring lawyers. We are pretty switched on. So therefore, the aim is to make a very, very good, educated guess that this is going to be a firm that we vibe with. So, so beyond the the firm's websites, like we spoke about, events are good to attend, where you can go and meet representatives of the firm, speak to them, and understand what they do, etc. Also, going on to things like Legal Cheek and Chambers Student are really good resources. Connecting on LinkedIn and speaking to trainees and people from the firm. But what I wouldn't suggest is what I used to get a lot of, which is the questions on the application form just reworded, because I'm not going to answer that. So yeah, I think you can do an all manner of things, but I'd say you need to go beyond just the website for sure.
Yeah, cool. That's a really good answer, and I've not really got much to add to that. I think you've touched up on everything. And I know you mentioned this earlier on, but could you just sum up what success looks like for you now? And I remember at the start you were saying, you were so focused on securing a training contract, and then you sort of realized, this is what you're passionate about. Sitting here today now, what does success look like for you?
In present form, or what, like in the future? What do I think success will look like in?
Yeah, so everything you've done today, all the achievements you've had, looking forward, what does success look like for you?
That's a really good question. At the moment, aside from having a very cliche answer like being happy, I don't think I've got one, on the basis that at the moment I'm just very much focused on the here and now.
I think that's a really good answer, because sometimes, we can be so focused on, I want this in a year's time, or I'm not happy with this, but actually being grateful and content
Yeah,
or happy now, it is success.
it's led me to something that I spoke about to one of my mentees earlier this year. One of the things I personally regret is saying no to too much when I was younger, because I was so focused on finishing my LPC or work or the degree, or more importantly and most consistently getting a training contract, that any time I'd spend away from something that was moving the needle on those goals would fill me with guilt, and would fill me with absolute, I'd be out with friends and all I could think about is I should be home revising or doing this, and that's unhealthy. So I think I've spent, probably a long time doing that. That for now, I just want to kind of just focus on the here and now, and help my clients, and then just focus on the present. But I also think that's partly down to the fact that I've delayed gratification for so long, and I think we do that. So one of the things that I try and instill in my mentees is, it's kind of giving them the license to also enjoy their life, right? Life isn't dictated by whether or not you've got a training contract, right? Life actually still moves on. So you still need to enjoy life in the present, because you've worked bloody hard to get through a law degree, or to get to your current paralegal role, or whatever it might be. So also kind of, yeah, it's tricky. But yeah, for me, success is just enjoying the moment for the time being. And then
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that really honest answer. Before we move on to our final round, I just want to say, this has been really invaluable for me, and I'm sure it's been invaluable for people that are going through these recruitment cycles. And I'm confident that a lot of people can relate to the experiences you've had, and how you've excellently explained how those experiences have shaped who you are today, and how you were able to, sort of reflect on positives and negatives to help you in cycles. And so I really appreciate that, and thank you so much for coming on.
no problem.
Yeah, so anyone that wants to reach out to you and contact you, what are sort of the best platforms?
They can't. No, I'm joking. Yeah, so LinkedIn, Ayaz Saboor, and Instagram, ayaz.law. And I pretty much reply to every single message I ever receive.
Okay, cool.
I try to.
Yeah, so you can contact Ayaz on LinkedIn or Instagram. And now we're going to head on to our quick fire round. So for these questions, I don't want you to think too much, just short answers on whatever comes to mind. So there's roughly 10 questions here.
Okay,
All right, cool.
I like this.
So are you a coffee or tea person?
Coffee.
Okay, cool. One word to describe your journey so far.
Interesting.
Most underrated skill in the legal profession.
The word talking's coming to mind.
One book every aspiring lawyer should read.
Tomorrow's Lawyer by Watts. the guy's name, Richard Susskind.
Briefly, what's that book about?
It's basically his interpretation of what the future of law will look like and how tomorrow's lawyers will look as well. I think the version that I read it years and years ago, which is why my recollection is a bit hazy, but I do believe he's updated it a good couple of times since. And I recall it being a very good book.
Okay, cool. And your go-to source for commercial awareness, if you still have one?
I don't currently have one, but I'm going to big up Idin's platform, Little Law.
Yeah, cool. Biggest misconception about working in law?
That you're just going to be stood at a photocopier?
Well, yeah, remote working's changed that.
Well, still a myth.
If you weren't in law or coaching, what would you be doing?
Footballer? Nah, I don't have the discipline for that. I would be
Cristiano Ronaldo's mascot?
What would I be? I'd say accountant, probably. God, I choose such boring careers.
Numbers.
Yeah, I love numbers.
So most rewarding part of your current role, and I know you've mentioned this.
Just helping people realise and achieve a goal that they thought was inconceivable.
Okay, nice. And what's one thing you wish law firms did differently?
In the current market for junior and entry-level entrants, I wish they were treated nicer and not just ghosted. You know, when they're applying for paralegal roles or I get how oversaturated the market is, but I do think junior lawyers can be treated nicer in this process.
Yeah. And what's one thing you love about the legal industry?
The people I've met. I think the people I've met in the legal industry and continue to meet are amazing, interesting, and so varied. And yeah, I enjoy meeting new people, which is why we're here.
Yeah. And final piece of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with in one sentence?
Don't give up.
Okay, nice. So thank you so much, Ayaz. Like I said, it's been amazing having you on this podcast today. I've learned a lot. Our listeners will learn a lot once this episode's out. And yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.